Okay, great. Well, so I've been asked to sort of shoot some questions across the panel, which I will do in a very kind and gentle way, and then we'll hear from yourselves with some ideas and thoughts and some further questions as well, if that's okay. Yes.
Yeah, I'm from Director Racism, and I did go to Calais quite a while ago now to take some stuff over when the jungle was still there. Then the jungle got burnt down, and I know that there's a lot of people sleeping rough. But I was particularly wondering what happened to the women and the children, because I know there was some kind of resettlement stuff that you mentioned. But what does that mean? What does it mean? Does it mean just stuck there forever? Or are they being processed to see if they're, what's going on with that particular group of people?
The French authorities, did respond very late in the day, and certainly all the families and women were offered asylum, so they were offered to go and claim asylum, and some families were taken to various, the French took, there was about 10,000 people in the camp at the end, so they sent buses, and they invited people to get on the buses and were driven across France to various reception centres whereby they could claim asylum and go into the system. So certainly the opportunity was there for people to go across. It was very vague. It was a picture of France, and they were told, you go here, get on the bus. But we have had some, good feedback from some families, and certainly with the women and women with children, there was a level, social workers were there supporting them. It's not great, and it's difficult. France has large numbers, so they haven't really put the resources in to deal with it, so people are waiting long times, but certainly they did offer, and they still offer. There are social workers and French authorities in Calais and Dunkirk now offering asylum, and families, children are offered to go into the French system. It's poor, but it's there.
We've had a number of our young people that came under the Dublin Convention, but when they left Calais they were taken to the Spanish border and kept in a hostel or something. Yeah. Which they said conditions were much better there than they were in Calais, and then they were processed and they joined their relatives in the UK. But it just seemed quite a long way to send them almost to Spain to then send them back again.
Right across France it was, yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to take some more questions from the audience in a little while. I'd like to ask everybody on the panel a couple of things. So, and you're completely, it's okay to opt out as well, because I've tried to come up with some really challenging ones. So, just to wake us all back up a bit. That was a bit cheeky, isn't it? No, the first question is, if you were able to change policy, so one policy, let's say, and you can choose either an international, European-wide, national or local level, or all four if you're feeling really ambitious. What one policy would you change in the service of the young people, their rights and their care? So that's one.
Well, for me, for me, it's not so much policy but more procedural practice. Is that the children that are coming under the Dublin arrangements, when they get to the UK, they kind of fall between all the support networks that are put in place for everybody else, so they really struggle with accessing support. So for me, it would be to put something in place to support those children and those families that they come to join financially, because they can't access asylum support because they're children, and the people that they come to join are adults who have status here usually, so they're on benefits. But they can't claim benefits for their children because they're asylum seekers. So they fall between the two systems, and until they get into school and they're regularly going to school, they can start getting child benefit for them. There's really, and families do really struggle because quite often they're on benefits themselves or quite low incomes, and suddenly they have one or two extra children to support. It's quite often the accommodation is very overcrowded, and it's not really been thought through where the children will sleep. And then that process of just what happens when those children turn 18, are the families still able to support them or not? There's still a lot of thinking through and joined up thinking that needs to be done, because there was a lot of pressure, and there still is, to get children out of Europe from the conditions there and bring them here. But we've had young people that have actually ended up destitute here because that procedure hasn't been thought through. So for me, for the impact of the young people I see, would be to put something in place for that group of young people.
Well, changing policy, it would be just nice if they stuck to the ones they'd already agreed on, you know, because there's some really good stuff out there if people read it and did it. There is really, really good stuff out there. I think something in the UK for me, and it's a bit of a pipe dream, I guess, but again, working with younger children, I find it disgusting that we put younger children through the asylum process at all. Children arriving here 10, 11, 12 years old, they're not necessarily have to go for the full interviews or whatever what 12-year-olds do. So 12-year-olds will be expected to go through the Home Office process, interviewed, and again they decide on credibility. I mean, I don't know if you spent much time with a 12-year-old boy that's traumatised. I don't know, they're tricky enough as it is, isn't it? Without adding everything else, all the additional stuff in, and they're judged on their credibility. It's very haphazard decisions based on credibility. They might not have liked the child, so they decided they're not going to give that child protection. And then another one, they will, and the case is almost identical, so it's a very haphazard process. So for me, I would seriously want to discuss why do we put young children through the asylum process at all.
I'm going to answer this in a really typically academic way. Sometimes we get accused of debating how many angels sit on top of the pinhead, and I think rather than thinking about a specific practice or policy, because those who are working at the top face are far better equipped to know some of the mechanics of how this stuff works. I think I would want to encourage us to think not about unaccompanied minors or even asylum and migration policies, but actually some of the geopolitics that are beginning to underpin this. So I think it's short-sighted of us sometimes to concentrate on the true horror of what these young people and children are experiencing. We need to do that. That's the end product of actually a series of processes that have nothing to do with them whatsoever. And that suddenly got worse sometime around November last year. I can give you a hint as to what that means if people are uncertain. But some of the geopolitics, particularly around conflict, and then some of the rise of ethno-nationalism, a lot of that stuff absolutely needs to be challenged. So my 2 pennies worth would be to keep a kind of both and discussion going all the time. What can we do for the children and young people, and what do we really need to be doing to begin to change some of the conditions in which this phenomenon occurs?
Which is a brilliant sort of lead-in to my next question, which is, so one of the focuses, that I know that Ambrose has got in mind for the festival is what can people do? What can the people who are sitting here today in the audience, what can they do? And whether that's, who should they be talking to? Who should they be writing to? What should they be doing if they meet an asylum seeker? How should they speak to somebody who speaks out in a hateful way about refugees or asylum seekers or migrants? So I guess that's the next thing is can you give us some pointers? If you would like all of these people to go away and do something, or do a few things over the next sort of few weeks and months, what would you suggest?
It strikes me that we're at an absolutely critical crossroads politically. I mean, I think every generation probably says this is the most important time of our generation, but I genuinely think it is. We've had a situation in Britain with the whole Brexit shambles. We see the rise of ethno-nationalisms in Europe, and we see Trump in America. All of these things have happened because the rules of democracy have been applied. I mean, we might argue about Russian interference, but generally speaking, people voted and we ended up in this mess. So I would say that the one thing that we actually need to do is remind ourselves of what it is that we value, and to get out there and start convincing other people, what does justice mean? Justice isn't a highfalutin idea. Justice is a very specific thing. You know, you can translate it to equal access to the law, equal protection under the law. What do we mean by democracy? It isn't everyone gets a say. It's a very particular thing. So we need to become much more educated about what it is that we stand for in the governments, or what we want our governments to do. And we need to educate a lot more people out there. Because, I mean, I suppose as an educator, I'm bound to say we need to educate, really. But genuinely we do. I think the level of political and civic conversation is very poor generally. So that would be my 2 pennies worth.
I would say really to work with the existing resources to search them out and see what there is, because we saw last year people were getting quite emotional about some of the images that we were seeing about children and young people coming out, and we're going away and doing things and setting things up, and there was lots of stuff happening all over the place. And I didn't go to Calais, I think it was quite chaotic there with the people doing things, as well as here. But people that have worked in this area for a while have learned some things along the way. And it's better not for everybody to keep learning those same things. It's better to share that information and work together so that we can accomplish something a bit more direct, rather than everybody just rambling and trying to do things themselves. So I'd say support the other local charities, support existing charities that are already working on the ground, and see what you can do to support them, rather than going away and thinking about doing something independently.
I think I'm going with the educate yourself, because knowledge is power, and it's really important to, what did you say, know what you stand for. I think that's one of the biggest learning curves I've been on is, I think I know who I am and what I agree with and what I don't agree with, but I might not have been able to express that. I know in my heart where I stand, but I've had to actually learn about it, because there's so much rubbish out there, there's so much disinformation, there's so many people being led down. Trump got voted in, so there's so many people, there's so much rubbish out there, that for me I think it's this, we need to educate ourselves, we need to understand what is going on, therefore we can share that with other people, and get everybody understanding what is going on, and make sure that we don't go any further down the path that is looming at us. So I think it is that so important to find out, what do we stand for, but back it up and find it out and share that, and make that effort to educate yourself.
Can you say on that point, the Refugee Council publish a booklet every year called The Truth About Asylum, and that just gives statistics, so if people wanted somewhere to start, that's a really good starting point.
So let's go for some more questions and comments from people in the audience.
Hi, I've been doing work with lots of different charities, like including refugee charities help here, also with like for example like Palestine and Syria, because I've lived out there a few years back. So the question that I've got, addressing similar to what you were saying, is, well, obviously, summary to what everyone's saying, is that it's this massive issue about the way that people are being treated, like specifically in France. I know, like people I was doing some work with last week, they're all saying, it's not just about children, obviously, and women and children obviously represent the most vulnerable, but like when you have, like all these people in France now, like for example, like in Paris, there's like people just like living in tents on the side of the street, like, and how, and obviously like people always say they want to come here because you have the benefit system here, and so that's why people want to come here, or if they've got relatives here and all that sort of thing. And then the other question is, so one is how can you help these people? What's happening to help them? Because a lot of people are saying, what can we do? Like you set up a camp in Calais, for example. Now Calais is not existing, so how are these people being dealt with? How can we do something? Whose responsibility is it? Because obviously you have different governments and all this. Then the other thing in terms of responsibility is, how can we deal with why we have these conflicts going on in this place and nobody's addressing it? No one's like addressing the elephant in the room. Like people in the media, like what's happening in Syria. It's like there's almost no, like because of the power of big governments and the power of Russia and all this, nobody is addressing the real issue. Like how is Syria going to be returned to stability? Why, like what can you do in the world just to deal with these big questions, and like in terms of accountability, how can you press for accountability so you don't have these problems in the first place?
Sorry, I didn't ask your name.
My name's Lilia.
Thanks, Lilia.
Thanks.
I'll pick up on the last one and give my colleagues some time to think about the more immediate things that I have no idea how to solve. I think one of the really fascinating things about how do we hold our governments to account, because that's basically the question you're asking. We are civic-minded people. In many senses, all of us sitting in this room are preaching to the converted. You're here, so clearly you have an interest in the issue. So then the question is, how do we actually make our voice, for lack of better words, count? Well, that's I think one of the big burning questions of our time. When I say we're sitting at a crossroads, I think that's exactly what the crossroad is how can we hold our government to account. Some of it's about campaigning at the election level. Some of it's about campaigning and letting our politicians, both at the local level and at the national level, know what some of the issues and the problems are. Some of it is actually refusing the discourses and narratives that we hear at the moment. I mean, seriously, how many of us got our back behind anti-austerity politics 7 years ago? We knew that they were bad, but there was that just kind of mighty yawp from all of us just going, oh my God, this is horrible. Now, had we actually fought in a much more structured way at that moment, maybe things might have been different. I don't know. I wish I'd gone out on the campaign trail far more. I wish I really understood what was happening. So again, for me, it's that kind of plea. Don't trust the Mail. Don't trust the Tory Telegraph. Don't trust all of the awful newspapers. Get out to the real sources of information, whether it's a Refugee Council or whoever. And start organising. We need to remember, I'm looking out over the room, some of you probably remember the 1980s, some of you may not, but back, thank God it's not just me, we knew how to organise. And there's been a generation of organisation that's been lost. So your question comes as no surprise to me. And perhaps had you've been in Palestine, you've been in some of the very conflict-ridden areas of the world. And the thing that surprises me, I did some research last year across most of the MENA countries, the Middle East and North African countries, talking to young people who were involved in the Arab uprisings of 2011. And I was talking to them about their political participation. And the thing that floored me was that these young people, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, they knew how to organise. They knew how to mobilise. They knew how to resist within the law. They knew how to creatively resist as well. And I'm starting to go off on one, so I'm going to stop now. Over to you guys for something.
Seems like a big thing to try and fit through, doesn't it?
Yeah, we've got some big questions. We've definitely got some big questions today, and that's okay that we haven't got all the answers as well. But maybe there's some small things that people could be doing too.
Yeah, I mean there are still phenomenal organisations across Europe, in France, in Calais, in Paris, that need people's. I mean, it is all the first aid, relentless situation, so it's not resolving bigger issues, but there are fantastic people out there that need people to support them in their work. So if that's something people can give up their time to do, but again, it's about educating people. Still, there is an issue going on. It's really important. But, yeah.
Thank you. More from Alison.
Yeah, I was just going to say something, I can't help it, you're talking about organising, yeah, and I've got to say something basically. One of the things that we're trying to do things, obviously there's the refugee situation, it's horrible, but it is all political, as you said. And one of the things we're trying to do is get trade unions involved in recognising about the rights of migrant workers and refugees. And in that way, one, they've got money, two, they've got like a network of people, so we can influence things that way. The second thing is, to get out on the street campaign. We do that anyway. We're a small group in Leicester, we're countrywide, we're all over the country. On the 17th of March, it's going to be UN anti-racism demonstration, national demonstration in London. It's been going for a few years now. It gets bigger every year. We're going to be having a coach from Leicester. Let's get down there. Do you know what I mean? We don't feel quite isolated. Because people all over the country are up in arms, ordinary people, governments, they don't care, ordinary people up and down the country in arms. We just need to bring them together. And we can change things. I'm absolutely convinced about that. So I don't think we should be despondent about it, because it feels a bit despondent. It's a horrible situation, but ordinary people together can change it. So yeah, campaigning, lobbying, hopefully if Corbyn gets in, people should be lobbying Corbyn now, and that government to make sure they make a change as well. So,
And that's just a reminder, that's that you're from Stand Up to Racism. Leicester Stand Up to Racism. There are lots of groups, campaigning groups around, campaign against the armed trade. If you're thinking about in terms of the kind of the causes of a lot of the problems, that's a really important one in terms of saying to Britain, we shouldn't be exporting arms to Saudi Arabia to go and bomb Yemen, or, all these kinds of things. So that's absolutely right. There are ways that we can make a difference, and there